The morning sky over Kepler 442b burned orange and red, casting long shadows across the crystalline formations that jutted from the planet's surface like broken teeth. Commander Zethkar adjusted his environmental suit and checked his weapons charge for the third time in the last minute. His nervous habits had gotten worse since the hegemony forces first encountered the humans 6 months ago. The initial reports had been laughable. A species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, using chemical propulsion rockets and crude metal projectiles. The Hegemony Council had assigned this campaign to junior officers, expecting it to be nothing more than a training exercise. Clean up another primitive species, add another system to the Empire, and move on to more pressing matters. Zethkar had volunteered for this assignment because he thought it would be easy. Now, as he crouched behind a fallen communication array, listening to the screams and gunfire echoing across the battlefield, he wondered if he would live to regret that decision. Around him, the remnants of the 47th Hegemony Strike Force huddled in whatever cover they could find. These were soldiers who had conquered star systems, warriors who had faced down the mechanical horrors of the synthetic uprising and emerged victorious. Now they cowered like frightened children. "Sir," whispered Operative Vashti, her translator struggling to convey the fear in her voice. "The humans have broken through the eastern perimeter. Lieutenant Karatha's unit, they're gone, sir. All of them." Zethkar closed his eyes and tried to process the information. Lieutenant Karatha's unit had been 40 of the Hegemony's finest warriors, equipped with the latest plasma weaponry and personal shielding. They had been positioned on high ground with clear lines of sight and overlapping fields of fire. By every tactical doctrine Zethkar had ever studied, that position should have been impregnable. "How many humans?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Scanner readings suggest 12, sir." "Maybe 15. 15 humans had eliminated 40 Hegemony soldiers in less than 20 minutes. The mathematics of it didn't make sense. The humans' weapons were primitive projectile throwers that should barely scratch military-grade armor. Their tactics were documented as straightforward and predictable. Their physiology was unremarkable compared to the galaxy's warrior species. Yet here they were, systematically dismantling one of the Hegemony's most experienced fighting forces. A series of sharp cracks echoed across the battlefield, and Zethkar instinctively ducked lower. Those sounds were human weapons firing. He had learned to recognize them by now. The distinctive snap-crack of their chemical propulsion systems was unlike anything else in the galaxy. Most civilized species had moved beyond such crude mechanisms millennia ago, but somehow these primitive weapons were proving devastatingly effective against advanced technology. "Movement, northwest sector," reported scanner technician Meldor, his voice barely above a whisper. "Single human, approaching our position." Zethkar activated his tactical display and immediately spotted the figure moving through the crystal formations. It was moving wrong, he realized. Every species in the galaxy had predictable movement patterns. The Korthan moved in flowing, dance-like motions. The Veltar scuttled in efficient straight lines. The Morgothi bounded in precise geometric patterns. This human moved like liquid death. It flowed from cover to cover in ways that made Zethkar's tactical computer struggle to predict its next position. The movement wasn't just unpredictable, it was actively deceptive, designed to make targeting impossible. Worse, it was moving toward them with apparent complete disregard for the 36 weapons trained in its general direction. "Should we engage, sir?" asked Vashti, her weapon trembling in her grasp. Zethkar hesitated. Standard doctrine said yes, eliminate the threat before it could close distance. But something about this human's approach set off every instinct he had developed in 3 centuries of warfare. This wasn't the movement of prey being driven into a trap. This was the movement of a predator that had already chosen its victims. "Hold fire," he whispered. "Something's wrong." As if responding to his words, the human suddenly dropped from sight behind a crystal formation. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent except for the distant sounds of combat from other sectors. Zethkar's scanner showed nothing. His thermal readings picked up ambient heat signatures, but nothing that suggested a living being. Then, the screaming started. It came from behind them, from positions that should have been impossible for the human to reach. Zethkar spun around to see 3 of his soldiers writhing on the ground, clutching wounds that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. The human was among them, moving with a speed that his eyes could barely follow, striking with a primitive blade that somehow penetrated advanced armor like it was paper. But it wasn't the efficiency of the attack that froze Zethkar's blood. It was the expression on the human's face. Or rather, the lack of expression. There was no rage, no bloodlust, no emotion at all. The human killed his soldiers with the same detached precision that a technician might use to disassemble a machine. "Open fire!" Zethkar screamed, but the human was already moving again, disappearing into the maze of crystal formations as plasma bolts scorched empty air where it had been standing moments before. "Sir, how did it get behind us?" Vashti's voice was approaching panic. "The scanners showed it in front of our position just moments ago." Zethkar didn't have an answer. By every law of physics he understood, what they had just witnessed should have been impossible. The human had covered impossible ground in impossible time while remaining invisible to their sensors. It was as if the creature had simply teleported from one position to another. A new sound reached his ears, carried on the wind from the eastern sector where Lieutenant Karatha's unit had met their fate. It was singing. The humans were singing as they killed his soldiers. The translators struggled to convert the words, but the melody was hauntingly beautiful, completely at odds with the violence surrounding it. "They're not just winning," Meldor said, his voice filled with a growing horror that Zethkar shared. "They're enjoying it." That was when Zethkar realized the truth that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The hegemony hadn't encountered a primitive species that could be easily conquered. They had stumbled into the territory of something far more dangerous than any weapon or technology. They had found a species that treated war not as a necessity or a burden, but as an art form. The humans weren't fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting because that's what they were designed to do. Shaped by millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried to kill them at every turn, refined by countless wars against their own kind, humans had become something the galaxy had never seen before. They were a species of born killers who had learned to cooperate. As more screams echoed across the battlefield and the human song continued its haunting melody, Zethkar finally understood why his commanding officers had started drinking themselves into unconsciousness every night since this campaign began. They weren't facing soldiers. They were facing an entire species of predators who had simply decided to turn their attention to the stars. And the galaxy would never be the same. 3 days after the Crystal Field massacre, Zethkar found himself in an underground bunker, staring at tactical displays that made no sense. The human advance should have stalled by now. Every projection, every simulation, every piece of conventional wisdom said that their primitive weapons and limited technology should have reached the breaking point against hegemony defenses. Instead, the humans had adapted. General Vexmore paced behind the command console, her massive frame casting shadows across the holographic displays. She had arrived that morning with reinforcements and promises that the human problem would be solved within the week. Now, 6 hours later, she stood in stunned silence as reports flooded in from across the continent. "Explain to me," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds, "how a species using chemical explosives and metal projectiles has destroyed 3 of our armored columns." Strategic analyst Kethlar manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the wreckage of what had been the hegemony's most advanced mobile assault platforms. "The humans have begun targeting specific components of our vehicles, General. Not the heavily armored sections where our shields are strongest, but the joints, the sensor arrays, the weapon cooling systems." "Impossible," General Vexmore growled. "Their weapons lack the precision for such targeting at combat ranges." "That's what we thought, ma'am. But, watch this." The hologram shifted to show combat footage from the morning's engagement. Zethkar watched in horrified fascination as human soldiers performed feats that contradicted everything he knew about their species. A single human, armed with what appeared to be an antique projectile rifle, was systematically disabling hegemony hover tanks from a distance of nearly 2 kilometers. But it wasn't just the accuracy that defied explanation. It was the speed. The human would fire, immediately relocate, fire again from a completely different position, then vanish before return fire could be coordinated. The pattern repeated dozens of times, each shot finding a different critical system on a different vehicle. The targeting solutions are mathematically perfect, Kevlar continued, his voice tinged with disbelief. Every shot hits the optimal point for maximum damage. Our tactical computers need several seconds to calculate those same solutions, even with advanced sensors and processing power. General Vexmore studied the display with growing unease. Are you suggesting these humans possess computational abilities superior to our military systems? No, ma'am. We've captured several humans for study. Their brains show no unusual structures, no cybernetic enhancements, no signs of artificial intelligence integration. They're calculating these solutions purely through biological processes. The implications hit Zethkar like a plasma blast to the chest. The humans weren't using technology to achieve impossible accuracy. They were simply that good. Millions of years of evolution had produced a species capable of making split-second calculations that required advanced computers for other races to achieve. A communication alert chimed, and Communications Officer Jeldar activated the incoming transmission. General, this is Colonel Morthak from the Northern Perimeter. We have a situation. General Vexmore straightened. Report, Colonel. Ma'am, we've captured a human prisoner. Young male, appeared to be injured and separated from his unit. We followed standard interrogation protocols, but... The colonel's voice trailed off. But, what, Colonel? He's not responding to any of our techniques, General. Neural probes, chemical compounds, psychological pressure, nothing. But, that's not the strangest part. He's answering our questions voluntarily. In perfect hegemony standard. The command bunker fell silent. Zethkar felt his 4 hearts skip beats as the implications sank in. How long have humans been in contact with hegemony forces, Colonel? 6 months, sir. Same as everyone else. And, you're telling me this human has achieved fluency in hegemony standard in 6 months? More than fluency, sir. He's speaking in military dialect with proper tactical terminology. He knows our rank structures, our unit designations, our operational procedures. It's as if he's been studying our forces for years. General Vexmore activated her personal communicator. I want that prisoner transferred to my location immediately. And, Colonel, what information has he provided? That's the other problem, ma'am. Everything he's told us has been completely accurate. Locations of our hidden supply depots, movement schedules for our patrols, weak points in our defensive positions. We've verified 12 separate pieces of intelligence, and all of them were correct. Why is a prisoner giving us accurate intelligence? A new voice cut through the transmission, speaking in accented but clear hegemony standard. Because, Honored General, we wanted you to know that we know. The transmission cut to visual, revealing a young human male seated calmly in an interrogation chamber. His hands were bound, but his posture suggested someone completely at ease with his situation. When he smiled, Zethkar noticed that the expression didn't reach his eyes. We have been listening to your communications since the second day of your invasion, the human continued. Your encryption algorithms are quite sophisticated, but not beyond our capabilities. We know your force strengths, your supply lines, your command structure, and your strategic objectives. General Vexmore leaned forward. If you possess such intelligence, why allow yourself to be captured? To deliver a message, Honored General. My name is Marcus Chen, Sergeant First Class, Human Colonial Defense Force. I am authorized to offer terms for your withdrawal from this system. The audacity of it struck Zethkar speechless. This primitive species was offering terms to the hegemony. A young sergeant from a pre-industrial civilization was calmly negotiating with one of the galaxy's most powerful military leaders. You are in no position to offer terms, human, General Vexmore said, though Zethkar detected uncertainty in her voice. Sergeant Chen nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps you are correct, Honored General. Shall I demonstrate our position instead? He spoke a single word in his native language, something that the translator rendered as execute. Every display in the command bunker lit up with incoming reports. The northern supply depot had suffered a series of coordinated explosions. 3 communication relay stations had gone offline simultaneously. The southern airfield reported that their fuel storage facilities were burning. In the span of 30 seconds, the hegemony forces on Kepler 442b had lost 60% of their logistical capability. Impossible, breathed strategic analyst Keflar. Those facilities were heavily guarded. The timing would require coordination across thousands of kilometers. Sergeant Chen smiled again. The word impossible appears frequently in hegemony tactical manuals, honored analyst. We have found it to be a rather limiting concept. General Vexmore's massive hands clenched into fists. How? Your guards were very professional, honored general. They maintained excellent discipline and followed all proper procedures. Unfortunately, your procedures assume that enemies will attack defended positions. We simply waited for your personnel to leave for scheduled patrols and shift changes, then entered the facilities during the brief windows when they were undefended. Security cameras, motion sensors, automated defenses, Keflar protested. All excellent technologies, honored analyst. We were quite impressed by their sophistication. However, you designed them to detect threats that behave like hegemony soldiers. They are less effective against threats that behave like humans. Zethkar stared at the young human's calm expression and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's environmental systems. The humans hadn't just outfought the hegemony forces. They had studied them, learned their patterns, identified their weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. But, even more terrifying was the casual way Sergeant Chen delivered this information. He wasn't boasting or gloating. He was simply explaining how things worked, like a teacher instructing students. The humans had dismantled the hegemony's tactical superiority so completely that they saw no need to be anything but polite about it. What are your terms? General Vexmore asked finally. Withdraw all forces from this system within 72 hours. Agree to a non-aggression pact with human territories. Establish diplomatic relations through proper channels. Sergeant Chen paused, and his smile became slightly less friendly. These terms are non-negotiable. And, if we refuse? The human's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the command bunker seemed to drop several degrees. Then, we will be forced to demonstrate additional aspects of human military doctrine, honored general. Aspects that we would prefer to keep theoretical. General Vexmore cut the transmission and turned to her staff. Assessment. Can we win this campaign? The silence stretched until Zethkar realized that everyone was looking at him. As the senior field commander, his opinion carried weight. He thought about everything he had witnessed over the past 3 days. The impossible speed, the inhuman accuracy, the casual dismantling of established military doctrine. No, General, he said finally. We cannot win this campaign. We probably never could have won it. Explain. Zethkar gestured toward the tactical displays showing the wreckage of their forces. We've been approaching this as a conventional military engagement against a primitive species. But the humans aren't primitive. They're different. They fight like no other species in the galaxy. Different how? Every other species fights to achieve specific objectives. Territory, resources, political advantage. We fight until we achieve our goals, then we stop. But humans. Zethkar paused, struggling to find words for the growing realization. I don't think humans fight to win, General. I think they fight to fight. War isn't a tool for them. It's an environment they've adapted to thrive in. The implications of that statement settled over the command bunker like a shroud. If Zethkar was right, then, the hegemony hadn't invaded a primitive world. They had stumbled into the territory of a species that viewed warfare as a natural state of being. And that changed everything. The second week of the campaign began with silence. Zethkar stood on the observation deck of the command bunker, watching the dawn break over a battlefield that had gone quiet during the night. No explosions, no gunfire, no screaming. just an eerie calm that set every instinct he possessed on high alert. In his experience, silence on a battlefield meant one of two things: either the enemy was dead, or they were planning something terrible. Given what he had learned about humans over the past week, Zethkar was confident it wasn't the former. "Sir," called Tactical Officer Rendell from the main display station. "We have movement on the eastern perimeter. Single contact, approaching under a white flag." Zethkar turned from the window, noting that General Vexmore was already moving toward the communications array. The white flag was an ancient human diplomatic signal that had been included in their first contact protocols. The fact that the humans were using it suggested they wanted to talk rather than fight, but Zethkar had learned not to make assumptions about human intentions. The main display activated, showing a human female walking calmly across the scarred battlefield. She was older than Sergeant Chen, with graying hair and numerous scars visible on her exposed arms. What struck Zethkar immediately was her bearing. She moved with the confident stride of someone completely comfortable in a war zone, as if walking through an active battlefield was as natural as strolling through a garden. "Incoming communication request," reported Communications Officer Jeldar. "Accept it," General Vexmore ordered. The human woman's face appeared on the screen, and, when she spoke, her hegemony standard was even more fluent than Sergeant Chen's had been. "Good morning, General Vexmore. I am Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Human Colonial Defense Force. I believe you've been expecting me. I don't recall scheduling any meetings, human." Colonel Mitchell smiled, and, unlike Sergeant Chen's empty expression, this one seemed genuinely amused. "Perhaps not directly, General. But I suspect you've been wondering how a primitive species managed to outfight one of the galaxy's most advanced military forces. I'm here to satisfy your curiosity." "You're here to gloat," General Vexmore said flatly. "Not at all. I'm here to offer you something far more valuable than victory or defeat. I'm here to offer you understanding." Zethkar felt his interest peak despite himself. After witnessing impossible feats of human military capability for nearly 2 weeks, the prospect of understanding how they accomplished them was compelling. General Vexmore seemed to share his curiosity. "Explain." Colonel Mitchell gestured toward the battlefield around her. "What you see here, General, is not the result of superior technology or numerical advantage. What you've witnessed is the application of principles that your species have never needed to develop." "You want to know how we're winning? It's very simple. You've been fighting a war. We've been practicing an art. War is not art, human. War is science. Tactical applications of force to achieve strategic objectives. For your species, perhaps. But humans developed differently. We didn't evolve on peaceful worlds where conflicts could be resolved through negotiation or where superior technology guaranteed victory. We evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill us every moment of every day." The colonel began walking as she talked, moving through the battlefield with casual confidence while her words painted a picture that made Zethkar's blood run cold. "Our homeworld was a nightmare, General. Predators that could kill us with a single strike. Weather that could freeze or cook us without warning. Diseases that could wipe out entire populations. Natural disasters that could level cities. For millions of years, survival meant being better at violence than everything else on the planet." She paused beside the wreckage of a hegemony hover tank, running her hand along the twisted metal. "But the real challenge wasn't the environment, General. It was each other. Humans spent millennia fighting wars against opponents who were exactly as intelligent, exactly as creative, and exactly as desperate as they were. Every tactical innovation was immediately countered by an equal and opposite innovation. Every advantage was temporary." Zethkar watched, fascinated despite himself, as the colonel began pointing out specific damage to the destroyed vehicle. "You see this impact pattern? This wasn't caused by brute force. This was surgical destruction. We studied your armor composition, identified the molecular stress points, and designed ammunition specifically to exploit them. Your hover tank wasn't destroyed by superior firepower. It was destroyed by superior understanding. Impossible, strategic analyst Kevlar interjected from his station. Such analysis would require laboratory equipment and computational resources that your species doesn't possess. Colonel Mitchell laughed, and the sound was both musical and terrifying. Honored analyst, every human soldier carries computational resources that make your military systems look primitive. They're called human brains. But, more importantly, every human soldier has been trained to think like an engineer, a scientist, a psychologist, and a philosopher simultaneously. She began walking again, her casual tone contrasting sharply with the horrific implications of her words. You want to know why your soldiers are dying, General? It's because we don't just train our people to fight. We train them to think. Every human warrior is taught to analyze their opponents, identify weaknesses, adapt their tactics in real time, and innovate solutions to impossible problems. What you call impossible, we call Tuesday. The communication display shifted as Colonel Mitchell approached a different section of the battlefield, this one littered with hegemony equipment that had been abandoned intact. Notice that we haven't destroyed everything, General. We've been selective. We took out your weapons and communication gear, but we left your medical supplies and environmental suits untouched. That's not mercy. That's strategy. Explain. Dead enemies don't learn from their mistakes, General. But soldiers who survive to tell stories about unstoppable human warriors? They spread fear. Fear is a force multiplier that costs us nothing and degrades enemy effectiveness exponentially. We're not just fighting your current forces. We're fighting your future forces by ensuring that every survivor of this campaign will hesitate when they face humans again. Zethkar felt his understanding of warfare shifting in fundamental ways. The humans weren't just winning battles. They were conducting a psychological campaign designed to make future conflicts easier by destroying their enemies' willingness to fight before the shooting even started. But Colonel Mitchell wasn't finished. However, the most important lesson from this campaign isn't about tactics or strategy, General. It's about perspective. You've been fighting to win. We've been fighting to learn. Learn what? The colonel's expression grew serious, and, for the first time, Zethkar detected something approaching genuine emotion in her voice. How your species thinks. How your technology works. How your society is organized. How your military doctrines evolved. This entire campaign has been an intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a war. The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been defending themselves. They had been studying their attackers, learning everything they could about hegemony capabilities and limitations. Every engagement had been both a battle and an experiment, designed to gather data about their enemies. Why? General Vexmore asked, though Zethkar suspected she already knew the answer. Because you're not the only military force in the galaxy, General. The hegemony controls significant territory, but there are dozens of other species with equivalent or superior capabilities. If humans are going to survive in this galaxy, we need to understand how everyone fights. You've been our first classroom. Colonel Mitchell stopped walking and faced the camera directly. The knowledge we've gained from this campaign is already being transmitted to every human military unit in the galaxy. Your tactics, your technology, your weaknesses, your psychological profiles. All of it is being analyzed, categorized, and incorporated into human military doctrine. She smiled again, and this time the expression was absolutely predatory. You came here to conquer a primitive species, General. Instead, you've provided that species with a detailed education in galactic military science. Every shot you've fired, every tactic you've employed, every strategic decision you've made has taught us something valuable about how to fight your kind. The colonel began walking away from the camera, her voice carrying clearly despite the increasing distance. The galaxy fears humans now, General. Not because we're the strongest or the most advanced, but because we're the most adaptive. Every species you know fights the same way their ancestors fought. But humans learn. We evolve. We become whatever we need to become to survive. As her figure grew smaller on the display, her final words echoed across the command bunker with the weight of prophecy. You've taught us how to fight you, General. Now imagine what we'll do when we meet your enemies. The transmission ended, leaving the command staff in stunned silence. Zethkar stared at the empty display, processing the terrifying implications of what they had just heard. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had used them. The entire campaign had been orchestrated to give humanity a complete understanding of hegemony military capabilities. But even more terrifying was the realization that this was probably happening across human space. Every species that encountered humanity was unknowingly providing them with tactical intelligence that would make them more dangerous to everyone else. The humans weren't just winning wars. They were learning how to fight a galaxy. The evacuation began at dawn on the 16th day. Zethkar supervised the loading of the final transport, watching his soldiers file aboard with the defeated shuffle of warriors who had learned that everything they believed about warfare was wrong. These were veterans who had conquered star systems, but their eyes now held the hollow stare of beings who had glimpsed something beyond their understanding. General Vexmore stood beside the transport ramp, her massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of defeat. She had accepted the human terms 12 hours earlier, after receiving detailed intelligence reports from across the sector that painted an impossible picture of human military capability. "Commander," she said as Zethkar approached, "I want your honest assessment. Could we have won this campaign under any circumstances?" Zethkar considered the question carefully. Over the past 2 weeks, he had witnessed feats that challenged his understanding of physics, psychology, and military science. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to violate natural law, yet every impossible achievement had been accomplished through purely biological means. "No, General. I don't believe we could have won. But, more importantly, I don't think the humans ever intended for us to win. This wasn't a war. It was a demonstration." "A demonstration of what?" "Of what happens when an entire species evolves for warfare instead of evolving past it." General Vexmore activated her personal datapad and pulled up the final casualty reports. The numbers told a story that would haunt military academies across the galaxy for generations. 4,300 hegemony soldiers had been killed or wounded. Human casualties numbered exactly 0. Not 0 deaths. 0 casualties. Despite facing overwhelming technological superiority and numerical advantage, the humans had emerged from 2 weeks of intense combat without suffering a single injury. "How is that possible?" General Vexmore asked, voicing the question that had tormented Zethkar's sleep for days. "I've been analyzing combat footage and sensor data," Zethkar replied, pulling up his own datapad. "The humans don't fight like any other species in the galaxy. Every other military force accepts casualties as inevitable. We plan for acceptable loss rates, we design tactics around replaceable personnel, we accept that some soldiers will die to achieve objectives." He manipulated the display to show thermal imaging from the previous day's engagement. "But humans approach combat with the assumption that 0 casualties are achievable. Watch this footage. Every human movement is calculated to minimize exposure. Every position they take provides multiple escape routes. Every engagement is planned with extraction protocols that activate before enemy responses can be coordinated." The footage showed a team of 6 human soldiers assaulting a fortified hegemony position. Instead of the frontal assault that hegemony doctrine would have demanded, the humans approached from 7 different directions simultaneously, creating a complex web of overlapping fields of fire that made return targeting impossible. "They're not just better trained, General. They think differently. Where we see necessary risks, they see solvable problems. Where we accept inevitable casualties, they innovate solutions. They've turned warfare into a precision science where the death of any human soldier represents a failure of planning rather than an acceptable cost of operation." General Vexmore studied the footage with growing comprehension. "You're saying they've eliminated the concept of acceptable losses." "Exactly. And that changes everything about how they fight. When you believe that every soldier must survive, you develop tactics that are exponentially more sophisticated than anything designed around acceptable casualties." A new voice interrupted their conversation. "An interesting analysis, honored Commander. Both hegemony officers turned to see Colonel Mitchell approaching across the landing field. She moved with the same casual confidence she had displayed throughout the campaign, but now Zethkar noticed details he had missed before. The way her eyes constantly scanned the environment. The manner in which her path provided optimal cover options. The subtle positioning that kept potential threats within her peripheral vision. Even in peaceful negotiation, the human was conducting a tactical assessment. Colonel Mitchell, General Vexmore acknowledged. I assume you're here to ensure our departure proceeds smoothly. Among other things, yes. But I wanted to speak with Commander Zethkar before you leave. His analysis of our tactics has been remarkably accurate. Zethkar felt a chill run down his spine. You've been monitoring our internal communications? Colonel Mitchell smiled. We've been monitoring everything, Commander. Every transmission, every tactical discussion, every strategic assessment. It's been quite educational to observe how hegemony forces analyze unfamiliar combat doctrines. She activated a small device that projected a holographic display showing detailed breakdowns of hegemony military communications from the past 2 weeks. Your insights into human tactical philosophy have been particularly valuable. We'll be incorporating your observations into our training protocols for future engagements with similar species. The casual revelation that humans had been learning from their enemies' analysis of human tactics represented a level of information warfare that made Zethkar's head spin. The humans weren't just studying their opponents' capabilities. They were studying their opponents' understanding of human capabilities, creating multiple layers of intelligence gathering that provided them with tactical advantages he couldn't even comprehend. Why are you telling us this? He asked. Because knowledge is power, Commander, and we want you to understand exactly how much power humanity possesses. You'll be returning to hegemony space with stories of human capabilities that will seem impossible to your colleagues. Some of them will believe you. Others will dismiss your reports as the fantasies of defeated soldiers. Colonel Mitchell manipulated the holographic display to show a galactic map with dozens of highlighted systems. Those who dismiss your warnings will be the ones sent to engage human forces in the future. They'll come with confidence, superior technology, and conventional tactics. They'll suffer the same fate you would have suffered if you hadn't been wise enough to accept our terms. Zethkar studied the map and felt his blood freeze. The highlighted systems represented major hegemony military installations, strategic resource centers, and population hubs. The humans had somehow mapped the entire hegemony military structure in the span of a few months. How do you know our force deployments? General Vexmore demanded. The same way we know everything else, Honored General. We asked the right questions and listened to the answers. Your own communications have provided us with detailed intelligence about hegemony military capabilities, deployment patterns, and strategic weaknesses. The colonel paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing. But that's not the important information, General. The important information is what we've learned about how your species thinks. How you make decisions under pressure. How you respond to unexpected threats. How your command structure functions in crisis situations. She gestured toward the transport where hegemony soldiers were completing their evacuation. Every one of your warriors has demonstrated behavioral patterns that we've cataloged and analyzed. We now understand how hegemony forces will react to specific stimuli, how your tactical doctrines will adapt to changing circumstances, and how your strategic planning processes will respond to various forms of pressure. Zethkar realized with growing horror that the humans had conducted a comprehensive psychological profile of an entire species while conducting military operations against them. They hadn't just learned how to fight hegemony forces. They had learned how to predict them. This was never about this planet, was it? He asked. Colonel Mitchell's expression grew serious. No, Commander. This was about understanding what humanity faces in this galaxy. You represent one of dozens of major military powers that could potentially threaten human survival. We needed to know how you fight, how you think, and how you can be defeated. She deactivated the holographic display and faced both hegemony officers directly. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and humanity is still learning the rules. But we learn very quickly, and we adapt to whatever challenges we encounter. Your invasion of this system has taught us everything we need to know about fighting your kind. General Vexmore straightened to her full height, attempting to project authority despite their circumstances. And what will humanity do with this knowledge? Nothing, provided the hegemony honors the non-aggression pact. We have no interest in conquest or expansion into your territory. We simply want to ensure that no one makes the mistake of attacking human colonies again. The colonel began walking toward the landing field's exit, then paused and turned back. But, General, I want you to understand something very clearly. This campaign was conducted with minimal human resources against a limited hegemony force. What you've witnessed represents a tiny fraction of human military capability applied under significant restraints. Her smile returned, and Zethkar noticed that it no longer seemed friendly. If the hegemony ever violates our agreement, the response will not be limited. It will not be restrained. And it will not be survivable. As Colonel Mitchell disappeared into the distance, Zethkar found himself staring at the empty battlefield where his understanding of warfare had been permanently shattered. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that seemed to violate natural law, but the most terrifying realization was that they had been holding back. Everything he had witnessed, every impossible feat, every tactical innovation that had decimated hegemony forces, represented restraint. The humans had been conducting a careful demonstration rather than an actual military campaign. Commander, General Vexmore said quietly. When we return to hegemony space, what will you tell the Council about what we learned here? Zethkar considered the question as the final transport lifted off, carrying the last of their forces away from a world that had changed everything he believed about war, about evolution, and about the true nature of predatory species. The truth, General. That we didn't encounter a primitive species that happened to be good at fighting. We encountered a species that evolved to be the perfect killers in a galaxy full of things that needed to be killed. He paused, watching the planet shrink beneath them as they escaped toward the safety of space. And that the galaxy has no idea what it's unleashed. 6 months after the evacuation from Kepler 442b, Zethkar stood before the Hegemony War Council in the towering crystal chambers of High Command. The assembled representatives of 17 different species listened in complete silence as he delivered his final report on the human campaign. The silence itself was unprecedented. The War Council chamber had never been quiet for more than 30 seconds in its 1,000-year history. In conclusion, Zethkar said, manipulating the holographic display to show the final strategic assessment, humanity represents an existential threat to conventional military doctrine. Not because of superior technology or numerical advantage, but because they approach warfare from evolutionary perspectives that render traditional tactical and strategic frameworks obsolete. High Commander Thekmoros, a massive crystalline being whose species had conquered star systems when the hegemony was still a single-planet government, leaned forward with grinding sounds that indicated deep concern. Commander Zethkar, your report suggests that a species using primitive chemical weapons and metal projectiles defeated advanced hegemony forces through tactics alone. This contradicts fundamental principles of military science. Yes, honored Commander. It does. The blunt acknowledgement sent ripples of unease through the assembled representatives. Zethkar had spent months preparing this presentation, knowing that the truth would be difficult for the Council to accept. The alternative, however, was to allow more hegemony forces to face human opposition unprepared. Explain how primitive tactics overcome advanced technology, demanded strategic analyst Velthorn, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. Zethkar activated a new section of the holographic display, showing detailed analysis of human combat footage that had been studied by the hegemony's finest military minds for months. Honored analyst, the humans don't use primitive tactics. They use fundamentally different tactical frameworks that assume capabilities our species don't possess. The display showed side-by-side comparisons of hegemony and human responses to identical battlefield situations. When hegemony forces encounter obstacles, we apply appropriate technology or acceptable force to overcome them. When humans encounter obstacles, they analyze the underlying principles governing the obstacle and develop innovative solutions that often require no technology at all. He highlighted specific examples from the combat footage. A hegemony unit encountering a fortified position will call for heavy weapons, air support, or siege equipment. A human unit will study the position, identify the psychological profile of its defenders, and exploit behavioral patterns to achieve victory without direct assault. War Counselor Jexandra, representing the galaxy's premier warrior culture, interrupted with a growl of disbelief. "You're describing impossible capabilities, Commander. No biological species can achieve the computational speeds and analytical depths your report suggests." "That was our assumption as well, Honored Counselor. We were wrong." Zethkar activated another display showing neurological analysis of captured human brain tissue. Post-campaign investigation revealed that human neural structures are organized differently from all known sapient species. Where other species evolved specialized brain regions for specific functions, humans developed massive interconnected networks that allow parallel processing of multiple complex tasks simultaneously. The implications of the neural analysis had taken hegemony scientists months to understand. Human brains didn't just think faster than other species. They thought differently, processing tactical, strategic, psychological, and technological information as integrated systems rather than separate specialties. More importantly, Zethkar continued, humans demonstrate adaptive capabilities that suggest their species evolved under selection pressures unlike anything experienced by other sapient life. They don't just learn from experience. They extrapolate principles from limited data and apply those principles to completely unrelated situations. High Commander Thekmoros activated his personal communicator, speaking in the subsonic frequencies that his species used for private communication. After several minutes of consultation with his advisors, he returned his attention to Zethkar. "Commander, your report recommends immediate implementation of the non-aggression pact with human territories and classification of humanity as a galactic strategic threat. These are extraordinary recommendations that would fundamentally alter our military posture. What evidence supports such extreme measures?" Zethkar had prepared for this question, though he dreaded having to answer it. The truth about what the hegemony had discovered during their investigation of human capabilities would change everything about how the galaxy approached interspecies relations. "Honored Commander, the evidence is both simple and terrifying. During our campaign against human forces, we documented human soldiers achieving feats that our technology cannot replicate. Individual humans regularly demonstrated reaction times faster than our computer systems, accuracy superior to our targeting algorithms, and tactical innovations that our strategic computers classify as impossible." He paused, allowing the assembled representatives to process the implications before delivering the final revelation. But the most disturbing discovery came during post-campaign analysis of human communications. "The humans we fought on Kepler 442b were not elite forces, Honored Commander. They were civilian colonists." The War Council chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds as representatives from 17 species attempted to voice their disbelief simultaneously. Zethkar waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. "The humans we encountered had received basic military training as part of their colonial preparation, but they were farmers, engineers, teachers, and merchants. None of them were professional soldiers. The tactical capabilities that decimated our forces represent baseline human competency rather than specialized military training." The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Zethkar could hear his own breathing in the vast chamber as the assembled representatives struggled to comprehend what they had just learned. Strategic analyst Velthorn was the first to recover her composure. "If civilian humans possess such capabilities, what can we expect from their actual military forces?" "Unknown, Honored Analyst. Human military units remain classified information that our intelligence services have been unable to penetrate. However, extrapolation from civilian capabilities suggests that professional human warriors would represent threats beyond our current ability to counter." War Counselor Jexandra leaned forward, her predatory features reflecting the aggressive nature of her species. "Are you recommending that the hegemony avoid conflict with a primitive species out of fear?" Zethkar met her gaze directly, knowing that his next words would either save countless lives or end his military career.
Honored Counselor, I am recommending that the hegemony recognize reality. Humanity is not a primitive species.
They are the most dangerous predatory civilization the galaxy has ever encountered, and they are still learning how to use their capabilities. He activated the final section of his presentation, showing intelligence reports that had arrived from across hegemony space during the months following their campaign. Since our withdrawal from Kepler 442b, 17 other major galactic powers have attempted military action against human territories. All 17 have negotiated immediate ceasefires and non-aggression pacts. The pattern is consistent across different species, different technologies, and different tactical doctrines. The display showed a growing map of human influence across the galaxy, spreading not through conquest but through demonstrated military superiority that convinced potential enemies to avoid conflict entirely.
Humanity is expanding their sphere of influence without fighting additional wars, Honored Counselor.
Every species that encounters them reaches the same conclusion we reached.
Direct conflict with humans is not survivable. High Commander Thekmoros studied the strategic display with obvious unease. Commander, are you suggesting that humanity could threaten the entire galaxy?
No, Honored Commander. I'm suggesting that humanity already does threaten the entire galaxy, and the only reason we're not at war with them is that they don't want to fight us. Zethkar manipulated the display to show the human terms that had been offered to each of the 17 species that had attempted military action. Every negotiation has followed the same pattern. Humans demonstrate overwhelming tactical superiority, offer generous terms for peaceful withdrawal, and establish diplomatic frameworks that provide mutual benefits. He highlighted specific clauses that appeared in every human treaty.
They're not seeking conquest, Honored Commander.
They're seeking coexistence. But they're doing so from a position of strength that makes refusal impossible.
The implications settled over the War Council like a suffocating blanket.
Humanity had achieved what no species in galactic history had managed. They had established hegemony through demonstrated capability rather than actual conquest, convincing potential enemies to surrender without fighting by proving that resistance was futile. Strategic analyst Velthorn activated her personal communication array, consulting with her species intelligence services before addressing the council. Confirmed reports from Veltar intelligence suggest that human technology has advanced significantly since the Kepler 442b campaign. They appear to be incorporating innovations derived from studying each species they encounter.
War Counselor Jexandra growled with frustrated aggression.
They're learning from every encounter, becoming more dangerous with each diplomatic contact.
Exactly, Honored Counselor, Zethkar confirmed. And they're sharing that knowledge across their entire civilization.
Every tactical innovation, every technological insight, every strategic development is immediately distributed to all human military units. High Commander Thekmoros stood to his full imposing height, his crystalline structure reflecting the chamber's lighting in patterns that indicated deep contemplation.
The War Council will vote on Commander Zethkar's recommendations. All in favor of implementing the non-aggression pact with human territories and classifying humanity as a galactic strategic threat?
17 appendages, claws, tentacles, and manipulator arms rose in unanimous agreement.
For the first time in hegemony history, the War Council had voted unanimously to avoid conflict with a potential enemy.
As the session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, High Commander Thekmoros approached Zethkar privately. Commander, your service during this campaign has been exemplary.
However, I must ask. Do you believe humanity represents an immediate threat to galactic stability?
Zethkar considered the question carefully, thinking about everything he had witnessed during those terrifying weeks on Kepler 442b.
The impossible speed, the inhuman accuracy, the casual dismantling of military doctrine that had served the galaxy for millennia. No, Honored Commander. I believe humanity represents something far more significant than a threat to galactic stability. Explain. I believe humanity represents the next stage of galactic evolution, Honored Commander.
Every other species fights to achieve specific objectives.
But humans fight to become better at fighting. They're not just a military power.
They're a military force that evolves in real time to counter whatever challenges they encounter.
Zethkar gestured toward the strategic display that still showed the expanding sphere of human influence.
The galaxy has spent millennia developing technologies and doctrines designed to fight the enemies we've known.
But humanity doesn't fight like any enemy we've known.
They fight like evolution itself, constantly adapting, constantly improving, constantly becoming something more dangerous than they were before.
High Commander Thekmoros studied the display with growing comprehension.
And you believe this evolutionary pressure will continue?
Yes, honored Commander.
And I believe that every species in the galaxy will eventually face a choice. Evolve to keep pace with humanity, or accept that they represent the past while humans represent the future. As Zethkar left the War Council chambers, he reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since those first reports of primitive humans using chemical weapons and metal projectiles. The species that had seemed laughably backward 6 months ago was now recognized as the most dangerous force in known space. But the most terrifying realization wasn't what humanity had accomplished. It was that they were just getting started. Every encounter, every diplomatic contact, every peaceful negotiation was making them more knowledgeable, more capable, and more formidable. The galaxy had awakened something that had been evolving for millions of years in isolation. Now that evolution was accelerating, driven by contact with dozens of different species, technologies, and tactical doctrines. Zethkar suspected that within a few generations, the question wouldn't be whether humanity could threaten galactic civilization. The question would be whether galactic civilization could survive contact with a species that treated evolution itself as a weapon of war. And, based on everything he had witnessed, he already knew the answer.